The brain is not impenetrable in an impenetrable fortress like vaccinologists would have you believe. And that's a really good thing, because other discoveries that have recently been made show us that, as I talked about earlier, as you go higher and higher away from the belly, this FA stands for femoral artery. And if we start there and we measure the level of aluminium in the femoral artery, and we call that level, whatever it is, we'll call that level 1, just to give it a baseline. And then as the blood flows higher up, what they find is that in this thing called common carotid artery, it's doubled. So something's happening that's multiplying the amount of aluminium as you go higher. The internal cerebral artery, it's tripled up to 3. Actually, that might be internal carotid artery. Yeah, that's internal carotid artery. Then you have the basilar artery. You're going up a little farther. You're up to 3.5 times the amount of aluminium that we found in the femoral artery. But look at this. The posterior cerebral artery, as we're going deeper into the brain, we're up to a level of 9 inside that artery. So as you go up higher, the aluminium gets concentrated in those arteries that are supplying the brain. And what they find is that the brain microvessel, those blood-brain barrier cells, have a very high attraction for aluminium. And those glial cells, these are cells that are basically the immune cells inside the brain, that aluminium is also highly attracted to those. And that's a problem, because these glia cells are very dependent on just the right amount of stimulation. You don't want them not doing enough, and you don't want them overactive, because if they're overactive, they can cause destruction in the brain. So these are all really important findings that support the fact that the brains in people with autism, that they show neural inflammation. So Dr. Paul Offit has been shown to be wrong by this groundbreaking paper in 2005. I don't know why he wouldn't have read this, because it completely destroys what he said. And they said, Dr. Vargas, we demonstrate an active neuroinflammatory process in the brain, all these parts of the brain of autistic patients. What happened was, so autistic kids die just like regular kids in car accidents, falling off of bridges, whatever, trauma, accidents. And so what they did is they got some children who did not have autism who had died, and other children who had autism, and they looked at the brains, and they looked for these inflammation markers, and they found huge amounts in these kids with autism. So this is an extensive report. I am just summarizing here. And they show marked activation of microglia and astroglia. Those are the cells, the immune cells in the brain that we don't want to be overactive. They're on fire in these autistic kids' brains. And their cerebral spinal fluid, also very, very inflammatory. So more recently, in 2013, Dr. Suzuki showed very clearly, and so you can see these colored dots right here. Those are the inflammatory parts of the brain that Dr. Offit says don't exist, okay? Here we have normal brains scanned. These are live people. These are normals. These are people with autism. Tell me, is there inflammation in the brains of autistic people or not? And again, this is just showing the different levels of these inflammatory markers in autistic people, and they're markedly, markedly higher. So back to Dr. Vargas, and these are some of the conclusions that we can make, that the brain isn't what we thought it was even last year. We're still making new discoveries. The science is not settled. The science is not what you're told commonly by the vaccine-promoting doctors of the world or the vaccine-promoting organizations of the world. The closer that you get to the brain, the more aluminium you can see in blood vessels. And there's a large body of modern research that says aluminium-activated inflammation occurs, and under some conditions could very clearly contribute to autistic-like disorders. The evidence for brain inflammation is overwhelming. I have shown you that aluminium is highly toxic to nerve cells in the central nervous system. I have shown you how aluminium crosses that barrier and gets into the brain. I have shown you how aluminium is found in blood vessels in the brain, leading to the brain. I've shown you how it's associated with inflammatory processes, how injection is not the same as eating it or ingestion, and how the studies that they did were highly flawed and probably represent academic misconduct to even use them for the claims that are being made about aluminium. And that there's a significant effect on animals' behavior, on their fear levels, on their intelligence levels, able to solve problems, between the ones that were given saline injection versus giving vaccine-relevant doses of aluminium. So we can't believe that aluminium is harmless, but we can remember back to a time when doctors told us lots of nonsense that people believed: hook, line, and sinker. There was once a time, probably before most of you were born, where doctors would sit on the ward of the hospital smoking, and where the patient would come up with the oxygen tank and ask for a light. There was a time when doctors recommended certain types of cigarettes over others, and where there was outright denial that tobacco smoke caused any problems. This is an actual ad from a journal, probably in the 1950s, I'm guessing. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. And even further back, we had this amazingly stupid practice of using arsenic as a universal therapeutic for everyone, including children. And we were told literally that arsenic was potent, effective, and safe, and that it generally agreed very well with children. People smoked arsenic-laden tobacco, they took it as medication, and there is an entire article that you can read more about that, talking about the Arsenic Act of 1851 finally occurring, and the prevention of secret poisoning. But arsenic, back in 1939, was actually a prescription drug, so it moved from household items into the pharmaceutical industry, approved by the American Medical Association. And in 1939, the American Medical Association lent what it called its seal of acceptance to a drug called triparsamide, which was an arsenic medicine manufactured by Merck under license from Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. And this drug was used to counter the effects of syphilis, often using 100 injections to a single patient. There were doctors that were saying this is a really bad idea back then, but they were completely overridden by the authorities at the time. This article here, Cormia, 1934, there's a quote from it that's saying, another patient had previously received 34 injections of arsphenamine, arsenic-containing medicine, 23 injections of bismuth, and 76 mercury rubs, and had a paretic, meaning paralytic type of serologic relapse after 104 injections of triparsamide. So clearly there has been a bit of a slow learning process in the medical establishment, and in that time, things are recommended to the public which are later determined to be severely problematic. And I predict that if the medical establishment develops any sense in the years coming, or any ethics, that aluminium will be seen very similar to arsenic was back then. There are many examples, like DES, diethylstilbestrol, you may have heard of, like thalidomide, and the list is huge. But the key problem is that we're talking about an almost insurmountable problem right now when it comes to this dogma of safety of aluminium, which is actually based on no science or very flawed science that is highly accepted through a medical establishment that does not read its own medical literature and reassures you that everything is great injecting this substance into your children. So much has been invested in terms of prestige, reputation, and money that to admit that aluminium can cause exactly what we know it can would have potential to undermine the public confidence in vaccines. Because if the public understood the implications of published science, they wouldn't be happy, and they would be demanding accountability. Therefore, a nation's, or I should say a world's, public health objective and a very profitable industry cannot be put into jeopardy. And that's why you're told that the aluminium in vaccines is so low it can't possibly be harmful, that your child's immune system is defective, immature, inadequate, slow, and insufficient to meet its needs. You're told your baby could die in order to get you to vaccinate, or you're told your baby could live with severe disability from disease if you don't vaccinate. The purpose of all of this is to incite fear and overcome your logical objections, and to make parents obey, even if vaccination is non-compulsory, like it is here for now. The vaccine industry is now one of the biggest industries ever on the planet. And the goose that lays the golden egg must be protected at all costs. And that's the way it's been for a very long time, but it's never been more so as it is today in the information era. So now we have no excuse not to have an understanding for ourselves of the discrepancy between what the medical establishment and the pharmaceutical establishment that are partnered with the governments and academia are telling us about aluminium, when we know what the medical literature shows, when we know what the medical literature that they're using to make their arguments is wrong. So, as far as what you do today, you have choice, and the buck stops with you, and it's your decision what to do. And I know right now you have complete freedom over vaccinating in these countries in Scandinavia.